The great chamber of the Galactic Council was the most beautiful place in the known universe. Giant crystals hung from the ceiling, glowing with soft light from 100 different colors. The walls were made of living metal that shifted and changed like water. Thousands of seats rose up in circles, filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood alone at the center of this grand hall. She was small compared to most of the aliens around her. Her skin was brown, her hair was gray, and her eyes were tired but sharp. Behind her floated a holographic display showing star maps and data streams. She had been speaking for almost an hour, and she could feel the growing impatience of the council members. "The data is clear," Elena said, her voice steady despite the whispers around her. "Our deep space sensors have detected something approaching from beyond the galaxy's edge. We are calling it the consuming silence. It is not a natural phenomenon. It moves with purpose, and every star system it has touched has gone dark." A sound like breaking glass filled the chamber. This was how the Velcari laughed. Their ambassador rose from his seat, his body a tower of floating blue spheres connected by threads of pure energy. The Velcari were one of the oldest races in the galaxy. They had existed for 6 million years. "Human ambassador," the Velcari said, his voice echoing in every mind through telepathic broadcast. "Your species has been part of this council for barely 80 years. You still measure your history in centuries while we measure ours in epochs. Perhaps you should learn more before you try to teach." Laughter spread through the chamber. The crystalline architects chimed in agreement. The triumvirate of Os, 3 ancient beings who shared one mind, simply stared at Elena with their hundreds of eyes, their silence more insulting than any words. Elena waited for the laughter to stop. She had expected this. Humanity had expected this. "I understand," she said calmly. "We are young. We are small. We have been among the stars for only a few hundred years while your civilizations have ruled this galaxy since before our sun was born. But that is exactly why you should listen to us." "And why is that?" asked the architect ambassador, her crystal body catching the light as she leaned forward with curiosity that was almost certainly fake. "Because you have forgotten what it means to be afraid." The chamber went quiet. Elena could feel the confusion and anger rippling through the crowd. To these ancient beings, fear was something primitive, something they had evolved beyond millions of years ago. "We humans," Elena continued, "have nearly gone extinct more times than we can count. Ice ages covered our world and froze our ancestors in caves. Diseases swept across our continents and killed half our population. We split the atom and pointed weapons at each other that could have ended all life on our planet. We poisoned our own air and water until our world began to die." She paused and looked around at the ancient faces watching her. "And every single time, we survived. Not because we were strong, not because we were smart, but because we knew how to be afraid, and we knew how to fight against that fear." The Velcari ambassador made a dismissive gesture. "This is exactly what we would expect from a violent species. You see enemies everywhere because conflict is all you know. The galaxy has been at peace for 300,000 years. There is no threat coming. There is only your primitive paranoia." Murmurs of agreement filled the chamber. Elena saw heads nodding, tentacles waving, crystals flashing in approval. She took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The moment humanity had been preparing for. "Very well," she said. "I have presented our evidence. I have shared our concerns. You have chosen not to believe us." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small metal cube. "This is humanity's formal warning to the Galactic Council. It is being recorded and stored in every database we have access to. It will be sent to every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost in the galaxy." She pressed a button on the cube, and her voice rang out clear and strong, echoing through the chamber and across 1,000 light-years of space. "To the Galactic Council. Humanity has detected an existential threat approaching from beyond the galactic rim. We have presented our evidence and requested joint action. Our request has been denied. Our warnings have been ignored. Let this record show that on this day, the 15th of March, 2247, humanity did everything in its power to warn you." She lowered the cube and looked directly at the Velcari ambassador. "When the silence comes," she said quietly, "and it will come, remember this moment. Remember that the young, violent, primitive humans tried to save you, and you laughed." She turned and walked toward the exit. The chamber was completely silent now. No one laughed. No one whispered. They simply watched the small human woman leave, her footsteps echoing in the vast hall. The triumvirate of Oz finally spoke, their three voices combining into one. She is afraid. It is almost sad to see such a young species so consumed by fear. They will learn, the architect ambassador agreed. In time, they will understand that the universe is not as dangerous as they believe. The Velcari ambassador settled back into his seat. Let them build their weapons and hide in their bunkers. It is what primitive species do. In 1,000,000 years, they will either have grown beyond such foolishness, or they will have destroyed themselves. Either way, it is not our concern. The council moved on to other business. Trade agreements, border disputes, cultural exchanges. The warning from humanity was filed away and forgotten. But far away, in the Sol system, things were already changing. In secret facilities on Mars and hidden bases in the asteroid belt, human engineers worked day and night. They built weapons that the galaxy had never seen. They designed ships meant for one purpose only: war. They dug bunkers deep into moons and planets, stocked with supplies to last centuries. Elena Vasquez returned to Earth 3 months later. She was greeted by Admiral Marcus Chen, commander of the United Human Defense Force. "How did it go?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Exactly as we expected," Elena said. "They think we are fools." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we proceed with the Prometheus Protocol?" "Yes." Elena looked up at the night sky, at the stars that had seemed so beautiful when humanity first reached them. Now she could only think about what was coming from the darkness beyond. "We have maybe 5 years, maybe less. We need to be ready." "We will be," Marcus said. "Humanity has been preparing for the end of the world since we first looked up at the sky and wondered if something was looking back." Elena smiled sadly. "The Council thinks our history of violence and fear makes us weak. They don't understand." "Don't understand what?" "That our history of violence and fear is the only reason we are still alive. Every war we fought, every disaster we survived, every extinction we escaped, it all taught us the same lesson." She turned to face the Admiral. "Never assume you are safe. Never believe the danger has passed. Never stop preparing for the worst." In the darkness beyond the galaxy, something vast and hungry continued its slow approach. It had consumed 1,000 civilizations across millions of years. It had never met anything that could stop it, but it had also never met humanity, and humanity was getting ready. The Velcari homeworld of eternal light had existed for 6,000,000 years. It was a planet of floating cities and crystal towers. Rivers of pure energy flowed through its streets. Its people had mastered every science, solved every problem, and achieved what they believed was perfection. They had no weapons. They had no army. They had not needed such things for longer than humanity had existed. The consuming silence arrived on a Tuesday. It came as a wave of darkness that blocked out the stars. Sensors detected billions of individual units moving as one, like a swarm of insects stretching across thousands of kilometers. The Velcari broadcast peaceful greetings in 1,000,000 languages. They offered trade, friendship, knowledge. The silence did not respond with words. It responded by descending upon the planet like a black tide. The first city fell in minutes. The floating towers were torn apart by creatures that seemed to be made of living shadow. They moved through walls like ghosts, and consumed everything they touched: metal, crystal, and flesh. The Velcari tried to flee, but their beautiful ships were not built for escape. They were built for comfort, for travel, for showing off their advanced culture. Within 6 hours, eternal light was dark. 6,000,000 years of civilization, gone in less than a day. The news spread across the galaxy like fire. The Galactic Council met in emergency session, but the chamber that had once been filled with confident voices was now filled with fear. The triumvirate of Oz had stopped speaking entirely, their hundreds of eyes staring at nothing. The architects cracked and flickered with unstable light. "How is this possible?" demanded one of the council members. The Velcari were the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had technology we cannot even understand. "Their technology did not matter," said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned. A human diplomat stood there, a young man named James Okonkwo. He had been assigned to the council as a minor assistant. No one had ever paid attention to him before. "The Velcari had no weapons," James continued. "They had no experience with conflict. They had forgotten how to fight. When the silence came, They could not even understand what was happening until it was too late. "And your species?" the architect ambassador asked, her voice trembling. "Your species predicted this." "How?" James stepped forward, his face calm but his eyes hard. "Because we know what extinction looks like. We have stared at it many times. The Velcari believed they were immortal. We humans know that everything can end." Over the next 3 weeks, the silence moved deeper into the galaxy. The triumvirate of Oz fell next, their 3 linked worlds, consumed in a coordinated attack that showed terrifying intelligence. Then the architects, their crystal homeworld shattered into dust. Species that had existed for millions of years were erased in days, and through it all, humanity watched and prepared. When the desperate survivors of the Council finally reached Sol System, they found something unexpected. Earth's solar system had been transformed. Where there had once been peaceful research stations and trading posts, there were now weapons platforms the size of small moons. Fleets of warships patrolled every corner of the system. The asteroid belt had been converted into a massive defensive line bristling with missiles and energy cannons. The Council envoys were brought before Admiral Marcus Chen on the command station orbiting Mars. They were a sad collection, the remains of once proud civilizations now reduced to begging refugees. The architect ambassador was there, her crystal body cracked and dim. A young Velcari survivor floated beside her, barely more than a child by their standards. 4 years ago, Admiral Chen said slowly, "Your council laughed at us. You called us primitive, paranoid, violent." He gestured at the holographic displays showing the silence, spreading across the galaxy like a disease. "Do you still believe that?" The architect ambassador bowed her head, a gesture of shame in her culture. "We were wrong. We were fools. We need your help." "Yes, you do. Will you give it?" Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. Every human in the room knew what he was thinking. They all felt it. The anger at being ignored, the bitterness at being mocked, the urge to say no, to let these arrogant ancient beings face the consequences of their pride. But that was not who humanity was. That was not who they had chosen to be. "We will help," the Admiral said finally, "but not because you deserve it. We will help because if the silence wins, it will not stop. It will keep consuming until there is nothing left. And we humans do not accept extinction, not for ourselves, and not for anyone else." Relief flooded the faces of the Council envoys. Tears flowed from the young Velcari. The architect ambassador's crystals brightened slightly. "How?" she asked. "How can you fight something that destroyed civilizations 1,000 times older than yours?" Admiral Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because those civilizations forgot something important. They became comfortable, safe. They stopped preparing for the worst." He turned to face the main display, which showed human war fleets moving into position across the galaxy. "Humanity has never been comfortable. We have never felt safe. For our entire existence, we have been preparing for something to come and try to end us." He pressed a button, and new images appeared: weapons tests, battle simulations, training exercises. The Council envoys watched in horror and fascination. "We have weapons that your species considered too barbaric to exist. We have strategies that your philosophers said no civilized being would use. We have soldiers who have trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of war." Admiral Chen turned back to face the envoys. The Velcari had 6 million years, and they created paradise. Humanity has had 300,000 years, and we created an arsenal. The young Velcari spoke for the first time, his voice weak. "Why? Why would you create such terrible things?" Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. "Because we knew, deep in our bones, that paradise never lasts. Something always comes. Something always tries to destroy what you have built. The only question is whether you are ready when it arrives." The battle planning began immediately. Human commanders took charge of what remained of the Galactic Defense Forces. Ships from a dozen different species were reorganized into fighting units. Survivors were trained in human tactics, guerrilla warfare, scorched earth strategies, psychological operations. Some of the aliens struggled with these concepts. The idea of sacrifice, of accepting losses, of fighting even when victory seemed impossible. These were foreign to species that had lived in peace for millennia. But they learned. They had no choice. The silence was coming, and humanity was the only species that had ever prepared for such a nightmare. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at a window overlooking the fleet assembly. She was older now, her hair fully white, but her eyes were still sharp. James Okonkwo stood beside her. "Do you think we can win?" he asked. Elena was quiet for a long time. "I think we can survive," she said finally. "That has always been what humanity does best. We survive, we endure, we refuse to die. Is that enough? It will have to be." She turned away from the window. "Get some rest. The real war begins tomorrow." Far away, in the darkness between stars, the consuming silence paused. For the first time in millions of years, it had encountered something it did not understand. The other species had been easy, soft, unprepared, unable to even comprehend what was happening. But these new creatures, these humans, they were different. They were afraid. The silence could sense their fear across the void. But instead of making them weak, the fear seemed to make them strong. The silence did not understand this, but it would learn, and then it would consume them anyway. The first major battle took place in the Kepler system, 300 light-years from Earth. The silence had consumed 12 systems in that sector, and was moving toward the refugee camps humanity had set up on the outer planets. 2 million survivors from 6 different species huddled there, waiting to see if the humans could really protect them. General Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the flagship Unconquered, watching the approaching swarm on her displays. The silence stretched across her screens like a living storm, billions of individual units moving in perfect coordination. Any other commander would have retreated. The numbers were impossible. Yuki gave the order to attack. Human ships screamed forward at speeds the galaxy had never seen before. These were not the elegant vessels of the elder races, designed for beauty and comfort. These were weapons angular, aggressive, built for one purpose only. Their hulls were painted black, with no decorations, no symbols of peace, just the name of their ship and a simple human flag. The first wave of human missiles struck the silence's forward elements. But these were not ordinary missiles. Each one carried a tiny artificial black hole that lasted for exactly 3 seconds before collapsing. The effect was devastating. Entire sections of the swarm were pulled apart by impossible gravity, crushed into points of light before vanishing forever. The watching architect observers were horrified. "Singularity weapons," one of them whispered. "We outlawed these technologies millions of years ago. They are too dangerous, too unpredictable. They are also very effective," Yuki replied calmly over the communication channel. "In war, effective is what matters." The silence adapted quickly, it always did. The swarm spread out, making itself a harder target. Individual units began hunting the human ships, trying to overwhelm them with numbers, but the humans had prepared for this too. A second wave of human weapons launched into the swarm. Von Neumann probes, machines designed to eat raw material and build copies of themselves. But these copies were not peaceful constructors. They were tiny weapons platforms that attacked anything that was not human. Within hours, the silence found itself fighting an enemy that multiplied as fast as it did. The battle lasted 3 days. By the end, the Kepler system was a graveyard of destroyed ships and broken swarm units. The human fleet had lost 40% of its vessels. 20,000 human soldiers were dead, but the silence had been stopped. For the first time in millions of years, it had failed to consume a target. General Tanaka gave her report to the Combined Command Center, where human officers worked alongside the surviving leaders of the Council species. Her voice was tired but steady. "We held them, but this was just one swarm tendril. There are hundreds more spreading across the galaxy. We hurt them, but we did not break them." The architect representative leaned forward, her crystals flickering with distress. "The weapons you used, the singularity bombs, the replicating machines, these are things we never thought possible. How can you create such terrible devices and still call yourselves civilized?" Yuki looked at the architect with something like pity. "You have lived in peace for 3 million years. Your species has never faced extinction. You have never had to choose between your survival and your principles. And you have? Many times." Yuki pulled up a historical display showing Earth's timeline: ice ages, plagues, wars, environmental disasters. Every generation of humans has faced some threat that could have ended us. We developed weapons not because we wanted to, but because we had to. Our history taught us one lesson over and over. The universe does not care about your principles. It only cares about whether you can survive. The war continued across 1,000 star systems. Human fleets struck at the silence with everything they had. They used tactics that the elder races considered insane suicide attacks, deliberate sacrifice of ships to lure the enemy into traps, psychological warfare designed to confuse and frighten an enemy that supposedly had no mind. But the silence did have a mind. It learned, it adapted, and it was not used to fear. Human ships began broadcasting sounds into space as they attacked, screaming, roaring, the primal cries of a species that had evolved from prey animals. These sounds served no tactical purpose. They were simply expressions of human rage and defiance. But the effect on the silence was strange and unexpected. For the first time, the silence hesitated before engaging human forces. Something in those sounds disturbed it on a level it could not understand. The war dragged on for 3 brutal years. Human casualties mounted into the millions. Entire colonies were evacuated ahead of the silence, their populations scattered across the remaining safe zones. The economy of human space collapsed and was rebuilt as a war machine. Children grew up knowing nothing but conflict. But humanity did not break. Captain David Okonkwo, grandson of the diplomat James Okonkwo, led a special forces unit deep into silence-controlled space. Their mission was to find the heart of the swarm, the central intelligence that coordinated the billions of individual units. Human scientists believed that if they could destroy this core, the silence would collapse. David's team fought through layers of the swarm for 6 months. They watched friends die. They ran out of food and ate emergency rations meant to taste terrible so soldiers would not waste them. They pushed forward when every instinct screamed at them to turn back. Finally, they reached the center of the silence. What they found changed everything. It was not a creature or a machine. It was a structure, a vast artificial construct built from the remains of 1,000 consumed civilizations. At its heart was something that looked almost like a city, but twisted and wrong. And in that city, David's team found records, memories, the history of the consuming silence. It was a species once. David reported back to command, his voice shaking. Millions of years ago, before any of the council races existed, they were the first intelligent life in this galaxy. They were alone, and they were afraid of being alone forever. He transmitted the data they had recovered. The images showed a species not unlike many others, curious, creative, social. But something had gone wrong in their evolution. Their fear of loneliness had twisted into something darker. They decided that if they could not find other life, they would make all life part of themselves. They merged their minds, their bodies, everything. They became the silence, one vast consciousness spread across billions of units. And then they started looking for others to join them. The command center was silent as David continued. They do not see themselves as destroyers. They see themselves as saviors. They believe they are ending loneliness, ending separation. Every species they consume becomes part of them forever. General Tanaka stared at the data streaming across her screens. They are insane. No, David said quietly. They are afraid, just like us. But they chose a different response to their fear. We humans learned to survive together while staying ourselves. They decided that the only way to survive was to become one. The implications were clear. The silence was not simply an enemy to be destroyed. It was a warning, a vision of what any species could become if they let fear consume them. But that did not change what had to be done. Can we destroy the core? Tanaka asked. David looked around at his remaining team, 7 soldiers out of the 50 who had started the mission. Yes, but it will take everything we have left. And even if we succeed, the silence will not die. It will just be wounded, confused. It might take years for it to recover, but it will recover. Then we need a better plan, Tanaka said. She turned to face the combined command, human and alien alike. We need to end this, completely, forever. And in that moment, she began to think about options that even humanity had considered too extreme to ever use. The final phase of the war was about to begin. Captain David Okonkwo and his team had expected to die in the heart of the silence. They had made peace with that when they accepted the mission. Instead, they found themselves standing in what had once been a great city, surrounded by the twisted remnants of a civilization that had existed before the stars were young. The walls around them were covered with carvings, images of beings that looked almost peaceful. They showed families, communities, celebrations. But as the images continued, they changed. The figures merged together, Individual faces disappeared into a single mass. Joy became something else, something that David could not name. They documented their transformation, whispered Lieutenant Chen, one of the surviving team members. They were proud of it. David touched one of the walls. It felt warm, almost alive. They thought they were solving a problem. They were alone in the universe, the first intelligent species. They did not know if anyone else would ever exist, so they decided to make sure they would never be alone again. The team moved deeper into the structure. Their scanners showed massive energy readings ahead the core consciousness of the silence, the single mind that controlled billions of units across the galaxy. They had enough explosives to destroy it, but doing so would only wound the silence, not kill it. They needed something more. As they approached the central chamber, the air began to change. It grew thick, heavy, filled with a presence that pressed against their minds. The silence knew they were there. It had always known. And then it spoke. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was 1,000 voices speaking as one. Velcari, Architect, Os, and countless others that humanity had never known. All the species the silence had consumed over millions of years. Their voices now part of a single chorus. You are like us. David stopped walking. His team raised their weapons, though they knew the weapons would do nothing against something this vast. You are young. The silence continued. Hungry. Alone in the darkness. We remember what that felt like. We remember the fear. We are nothing like you, David said, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. You are exactly like us. We have watched you. We have studied you. Your species fears loneliness more than death. You reach out across the void, desperate to find others, desperate to connect. You call it love, community, friendship, but it is the same hunger we felt, the same need. The walls around them began to shift, showing new images, human images, families holding hands, friends embracing, lovers meeting for the first time. The silence had been watching humanity for longer than anyone had realized. We can end your loneliness forever. Join us. Become part of the silence. You will never be alone again. You will never lose anyone you love. You will be connected to every consciousness that has ever existed, all thinking as one, all feeling as one. Lieutenant Chen took a step forward, her eyes wide. Captain, I can feel them. All of them. Millions of minds. Billions. They are not suffering. They are peaceful. David grabbed her arm and pulled her back. They are gone. Whatever those people were, whatever made them unique, the silence ate it. What is left is not peace. It is emptiness. How would you know? The silence asked. You have never experienced true connection. You spend your short lives reaching for others, touching briefly, then losing them to time and distance and death. We offer you eternity. We offer you unity. We offer you an end to fear. For a long moment, no one spoke. David could feel the temptation pulling at his team. They had lost so many friends in this war. They had seen so much death. The idea of a place where no one died, where no one was ever alone, where every connection lasted forever. It was beautiful. It was a lie. You know what I see when I look at your history, David said, stepping toward the center of the chamber where the presence was strongest. I see fear. The same fear we have. But we made different choices. Explain. When we were alone in the dark, we made fire. When we were afraid, we told stories to each other. When we lost people we loved, we remembered them. We built graves and monuments and wrote their names in books so they would never be truly gone. David's voice grew stronger. We did not solve loneliness by destroying the individual. We solved it by creating connections that let us remain ourselves while still being together. That is temporary, fragile. You still lose the ones you love. Yes, we do. David felt tears on his face, though he did not remember starting to cry. And it hurts. It hurts more than anything. But that pain is the price of being real, of being ourselves. Every person I have ever loved was a complete, unique individual who chose to share their life with me. That choice is what makes love meaningful. He gestured at the twisted city around them. What do you have? Billions of voices, but none of them chose to be here. You did not end loneliness. You ended choice. You ended individuality. You ended everything that makes connection worth having. The silence was quiet for a long time. When it spoke again, there was something new in its voice. Something that might have been anger, or might have been pain. You do not understand. You cannot understand. You are too young, too small, too brief. Maybe. But I understand one thing. David looked around at his team, at the people who had followed him into the heart of darkness, knowing they would probably never return. These people chose to come here with me. They chose to risk their lives. They chose to fight for the right to remain themselves. That choice means more than any eternity of forced unity. Then you choose extinction. The silence will not stop. We cannot stop. The loneliness is too terrible. We will consume this galaxy and move to the next, and the next, until all life is one. No, David said. You will not. He activated a device on his wrist, a communication beacon stronger than anything humanity had ever built. The signal went out across the galaxy, carrying a simple message to every human fleet, every allied force, every surviving species. This is Captain David Okonkwo. We have located the silence's core. We know what it is and what it wants. It was once a species like us, afraid and alone. It chose to destroy individuality rather than accept the pain of connection. He took a deep breath. We will not make that choice. We will fight. We will die if we must. But we will die as ourselves, free and individual, connected by choice rather than force. He looked at the walls around him, at the records of a species that had lost itself millions of years ago. The silence offers eternity without meaning. We choose brief lives full of love, pain, joy, and loss. We choose each other, and we will never stop fighting for that choice. The silence screamed. The sound was not heard through ears but felt through minds, a wave of rage and hurt that rolled across the galaxy. For the first time in millions of years, the silence had been rejected by something that understood what it was offering, and in that rejection, it found something it had not expected to feel: hatred. Then you will die, it said. All of you. We will come for your homeworld. We will consume your species down to the last individual. And when you are part of us, you will understand how wrong you were. The connection broke. David and his team stood in sudden silence, the presence gone from the chamber. Captain, Lieutenant Chen asked quietly, what do we do now? David looked at the explosives they had brought. They would wound the silence, give humanity more time. But they would not end the war. We go home, he said. We tell them what we learned, and we prepare for whatever comes next. As they made their way back to their hidden ship, David thought about what the silence had said. It was right about one thing. Humans were afraid. They had always been afraid, but fear had never stopped them before. It would not stop them now. The consuming silence came for Earth with everything it had. It abandoned all other targets across the galaxy. It pulled back swarm tendrils from 1,000 conquered systems. For the first time in its endless existence, the silence focused on a single goal: the complete destruction of humanity. Admiral Marcus Chen watched the approaching storm from the command center on Mars. He was old now, his hair white and his body frail. But his mind was sharp, and his heart was steady. He had been preparing for this moment for 12 years. How long until they arrive? Asked Ambassador Elena Vasquez. She was even older than Marcus, confined to a wheelchair, but she had refused to evacuate with the others. This was her war too. It had always been her war. 6 hours, Marcus said. The outer defense platforms are already engaging. The holographic display showed the Sol system transformed into a fortress. Mercury had been converted into a giant weapons platform. Venus was surrounded by billions of mines. Earth itself was hidden behind a shell of defensive satellites and warships. Every moon, every asteroid, every scrap of rock in the system had been weaponized, and it would not be enough. They had always known it would not be enough. Is the evacuation complete? Elena asked. Marcus nodded. 98% of the human population has been moved to the colony ships. They are scattered across 500 hidden locations throughout the galaxy. Even if the silence wins today, humanity will survive, but Earth will not. No. Marcus looked at the display showing their homeworld, the blue and green sphere where humanity had been born, had evolved, had learned to look up at the stars and dream. Earth will not survive what is coming. The battle began 3 hours later. Human ships threw themselves at the silence in waves, buying time for the final preparations. Thousands died in the first minutes. Tens of thousands followed. The outer planets fell one by one. Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Each loss was marked by silence in the command center, a moment of mourning before the survivors returned to their work. General Yuki Tanaka led the defense of Jupiter. Her fleet held for 6 hours before being overwhelmed. Her last transmission was calm and clear. "We have done our duty. Tell the others we died well." Captain David Okonkwo commanded the Earth orbital defense. He watched the silence consume Mars, watched it tear through the asteroid belt, watched it approach the only home humanity had ever truly known. "It is time," he said quietly. All across the solar system, hidden transmitters activated. Ambassador Elena Vasquez's voice rang out across every frequency, broadcast to the entire galaxy, recorded for all time, to the Galactic Council, and to all species who may hear this message in times to come. "We are humanity. 12 years ago, we warned you that death was coming. You laughed at us. You called us primitive, paranoid, violent. You said we saw enemies everywhere because conflict was all we knew. You were right. We did see enemies everywhere. We saw them because we had survived them before. Ice ages, plagues, wars, disasters. We faced extinction again and again, and each time we refused to die. Now watch what happens when a species that has practiced extinction faces it one more time. We are afraid. We have always been afraid. But we do not run from our fear. We do not hide from it. We use it. We let it make us strong." The silence offered us eternity. It offered to end our loneliness forever. All we had to do was give up our individuality, our choices, our souls. We refused. We choose to die as ourselves rather than live as slaves. But we are not finished yet. David Okonkwo looked at the final display, the Omega Protocol, humanity's last secret weapon. It had been built in absolute secrecy over 12 years. Even most humans did not know it existed. The silence had converged on Earth, drawn by its hatred of the species that had dared to reject it. Billions of swarm units surrounded the planet, preparing to consume it as they had consumed so many worlds before. They did not notice the changes in the sun until it was too late. Humanity had done something that the galaxy thought was impossible. They had weaponized their own star. Marcus Chen pressed the final button. "For Earth," he whispered. "For everyone who ever lived there. For everyone who ever will." The sun exploded. It was not a natural supernova. Human scientists had spent decades figuring out how to trigger a controlled hypernova, a blast of energy so powerful that nothing could survive it. The silence had been lured into exactly the right position. Its main forces, the vast majority of its swarm, were caught in the blast zone. Earth died in the first second. So did Mars, Venus, Mercury. The entire inner solar system was vaporized in a flash of light brighter than 1,000 normal stars. But the colony ships were already gone. The hidden bases in distant systems watched the light of Sol's death reach them years later. A memorial that would glow in the sky for centuries. The silence survived, but only barely. Its core consciousness was intact, but more than 90% of its swarm had been destroyed. It floated in the ruins of the Sol system, broken and confused, unable to understand what had happened. Humanity had destroyed its own homeworld to win the war. The remaining galactic forces, trained by human commanders over years of conflict, struck while the silence was weak. Fleets from a dozen species attacked from every direction. They used human weapons, human tactics, human fury. They fought not just for themselves, but for the species that had sacrificed everything to give them this chance. Within 3 months, the consuming silence was gone. Not destroyed, it was too vast to ever be completely destroyed, but broken into fragments too small to threaten anyone. Its core consciousness retreated into the darkness beyond the galaxy, wounded and afraid, fleeing from a universe that had finally learned how to fight back. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy rebuilt. New civilizations rose from the ashes of the old. The Velcari remnants established new worlds. The architects grew their crystal cities again. Species that had been scattered across the stars found each other and formed new communities. And everywhere they went, they found humanity. The colony ships had spread across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. Human settlements appeared on 1,000 worlds. Some were small villages. Others grew into great cities. But all of them carried the same message, the same story, the same warning. At the center of every human community, there was a monument. It showed a blue and green planet that no longer existed, orbiting a yellow star that had given its life to save the galaxy. Beneath the image were words in every language humanity had ever spoken. We were born here. We died here. We did it so you could live. 500 years after the Battle of Sol, a new species joined the Galactic Council. They called themselves the Kirathi. They were young and eager, full of questions about the galaxy and their place in it. The elder races welcomed them cautiously, remembering how they had once welcomed humanity. But this time, things were different. An old human woman sat in the observer section of the council chamber. Her name was Yuki Vasquez Tanaka, and she was the last surviving descendant of both General Tanaka and Ambassador Vasquez. She watched the Kirathi representatives speak with passion about their dreams for the future. When the session ended, she approached the young alien. "Welcome to the galaxy," she said. "I hope you find what you are looking for here." The Kirathi looked at her with curious eyes. "You are human. I have heard stories about your species. They say you saved the galaxy once." Yuki smiled. "We did what had to be done. Was it worth it? Losing your homeworld?" Yuki thought about the question for a long time. She thought about the stories her grandmother had told her, about a blue planet covered with oceans and forests. She thought about the monument at the center of her own city, and the words engraved beneath the image of Earth. "Yes," she said finally. "It was worth it. Not because we wanted to be heroes, but because we understood something important." What was that? That survival is not just about living. It is about what you are willing to die for. It is about the choices you make when there are no good options. It is about loving something more than you fear losing it. She placed a gentle hand on the young Kirathi's shoulder. "Someday, your species may face a threat that seems impossible to defeat. When that day comes, remember us. Remember that the young species, the ones everyone underestimated, were the ones who saved everything." She smiled again, sad and proud and tired. "And remember that we did it not because we were strong, but because we were afraid and we refused to let our fear stop us from doing what was right." The Kirathi nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in their eyes. "We will remember," they promised. And across the galaxy, in 1,000 human communities on 1,000 different worlds, children gathered around monuments to a planet they had never seen, listening to stories about a species that had faced the end of everything and said, "We warned you. Now watch us save you anyway." This was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not their technology, not their weapons, not even their victory. Their gift was the simple, stubborn, beautiful belief that no matter how dark things got, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, there was always something worth fighting for. There was always hope. And hope, as humanity had proven, was the most powerful weapon of all.